Well, good morning. I'm Senior Atmospheric Scientist Andrew Pritchard with a look at your ag weather update. Today is Monday, January 13th, 2025. The big story here continues to be the extreme fire weather conditions across portions of Southern California. The Santa Ana winds going to be reloading here. We'll see those conditions reaching extremely critical levels again today. And that's going to continue Tuesday and Wednesday, likely into Thursday, but we kind of lose some of the details there. We get a little bit deeper, but at least 3 more days of really extremely dangerous conditions there. And, as we look out into the future, it's possible we could see these conditions reloading over the next 10 to 14 days. We'll look for shots of Arctic air, multiple shots coming in over the next 7 to 10 days with a potential big cold snap January 20th through the 24th. Chance for sub-zero temperatures making their way through a lot of the Corn Belt. Looking for precipitation, a lot of dryness across the lower 48 and much of the Canadian prairie as we talk about the next 10 days or so. Some chances for some light to moderate snowfall in some of the higher terrain areas there across the Rockies. Otherwise, a lot of dryness across the U.S. until you get down towards parts of the Gulf Coast there. We've got some showers and storms in the forecast the next few days. But let's take a quick look at the hazards map. Again, pretty quiet across the lower 48. But we do have those fire weather conditions in place across Southern California, some freeze warnings in parts of the Central Valley and then across southern Arizona. And then we also have winter weather advisories and some small pockets there of winter storm warning conditions where we have lake effect snow across the Great Lakes, then some high winds across the northern high plains, parts of the northwest Montana area there, the high plains, the foothills getting up toward the Rockies. Now we'll zoom in on those fire conditions across Southern California. Again, it's that little area there north of LA, and then we've got critical conditions that extend down into Southern California, down towards San Diego. This is an update from the Los Angeles National Weather Service highlighting the area that's under this particularly dangerous situation red flag warning. This is very rare. Of course, we've seen it last week. We're seeing it again this week. So rare, but we've got it now. And this is, again, high winds, really dry conditions, and the availability of a lot of dry tinder there, dry vegetation, thanks to the drought conditions there. So very dangerous, likely continuing to see rapid spread of any new fires, and then the fires that are ongoing there are going to be, maybe ramping up, seeing some of that extreme fire behavior. Certainly, thoughts continue to be with the people who are fighting this and, dealing with the evacuations or the potential losses there. And that certainly could include some of our Nutrien Ag Solutions folks. We've got numerous facilities, 9 of them here that are highlighted across portions of Southern California within that fire weather risk here. Oxnard closest to that extremely critical fire weather risk, but some of those facilities there, between LA and San Diego, certainly falling within that critical risk today, tomorrow, Wednesday, and then potentially into the day on Thursday. Now, the good news is we don't have any severe weather to talk about, just a chance for a couple of rumbles of thunder across the Gulf Coast. Thanks to a lot of widespread cold, dry air. We've seen a recent intrusion, refreshing of the Arctic air mass across much of the central U.S., and that, of course, is not going to foster a lot in the way of widespread precipitation. Certainly not going to be fostering a lot in the way of severe weather. And that cold air continues to push down toward the Gulf Coast. We'll see several shots of cold air trying to make their way all the way down to the Gulf over the next 10 to 15 days. We'll look at the radar picture here Monday morning. Again, not a lot in the way of precipitation ongoing. Got that lake effect snow in the Great Lakes, some snow falling across the northern high plains, a little disturbance coming out of the Canadian prairie into parts of Montana and North Dakota today, and then the heavier precipitation can be found across portions of the Gulf Coast, parts of Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, seeing some showers and storms today. Now we'll just animate this over the next 3 days with the high-resolution NAM model. Not a lot of change. You see this system here across the northern high plains brings a little shot of flurries to parts of the central and eastern Corn Belt on Tuesday. Lake effect snow continues across the Great Lakes and the Northeast, and the rain that's ongoing across the Southeast moves out as we get into Tuesday morning. We'll look for another chance of some showers and storms near the Gulf Coast as we get toward midweek. Let's take this a little longer range with the European model, bring it back here to Monday morning. We've covered the next 72 hours here with the high-resolution NAM model, but you see the same thing. Quick shot of some flurries, sweeps out of the Dakotas through parts of the central and eastern Corn Belt over the next 24 to 48 hours. North of that, lake effect snow continues across the Great Lakes. Showers and storms here across parts of Alabama, southern Georgia, and northern Florida. May look for a little squall line to kind of make its way across the Florida Peninsula through the day today into the overnight. No organized severe weather expected there. Maybe some rumbles of thunder and some heavy downpours. Big polar high comes down through the central U.S. Again, it's cold and it's quiet across the Corn Belt. As this one moves off to the east, you'll see kind of just some return flow coming up across the Gulf Coast. It's not necessarily an organized area of low pressure, but we just get a little bit of rising motion and some return moisture flow from the Gulf of Mexico to bring us some renewed chances for rain and thunderstorms, really just hugging the Gulf Coast as we get to midweek, Wednesday, Thursday. Continuing to see little clippers come over the top of the ridge, bringing the chance for some snow to parts of the prairie midweek here. This would be kind of Wednesday and Thursday, but this big high keeps the impactful precipitation away from the Corn Belt, away from the central U.S. through much of the week. It's not till we get to the back half of the week into the weekend we'll look for the chance for an area of low pressure to emerge here across the southern U.S. Maybe a little bit more in the way of some snowfall here as high pressure gets that flow up against the Rockies. This is the next shot of cold air trying to work in right around January 19th and 20th. This is going to be a big shot of cold air, big shot of Arctic air that's going to make its way all the way down to the Gulf Coast. Again, a big polar high, not going to be supporting much in the way of organized precipitation. It's going to be very cold across a lot of the lower 48 as we exit next weekend. And get into early next week. That's going to be around January 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd, into the 23rd. Total precipitation, it's rather light. Heavy where you got the lake effect snow, certainly across the Great Lakes, but otherwise a light ribbon of snow through parts of the Dakotas, across the Omaha area, maybe through central Illinois into central Indiana down toward the Ohio River Valley. We're talking about, a quick coating, a trace, maybe up to an inch of snow with this little clipper that comes through on, through Monday into Tuesday this week. Otherwise, light snow across the northern and central Rockies, maybe some light snow all the way down into parts of New Mexico as well in the higher elevations. But total precipitation over the next 7 days, this is going to be liquid form, so you can see the shower and storm activity at times across the southern U.S. We're talking about, 1 to 2 inches of rain across parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, into Georgia, and the Florida Peninsula, the northern half of that as we get into next weekend. This is that late week area of low pressure that may impact the region. We'll talk about that a little more through the week, and then you see the higher totals with the lake effect snow, but otherwise the western U.S., the Rockies, the central U.S. looking pretty dry over the next 7 days. And the reason for that, we kind of continue to just reload the same pattern. We get disturbances coming over the ridge, diving in. At times we get a big trough across the central and eastern U.S. We get ridging across the western United States, and a couple things jump out at me. The first of which, we continue to see these areas of low pressure kind of moving down the west coast, cutting off of the coast of California. This is what continues to keep that fire weather risk at extreme levels at times. And as I kind of run this animation through this week, we see the current risk there, that cutoff low then emerges. This is almost the same thing we saw happen during the last week. These cutoff lows, they kind of come down here across the southwest and then eventually make their way east. We get an area of fast flow across the Gulf Coast, and that supports kind of a broad area of low pressure, a broad area of precipitation across the southern U.S., and that's what we'll see here as we get toward the late part of the week. But let's take this into next week. Here's the big trough that develops and brings us that big shot of, Arctic air. But here comes another low right down the west coast, cutting off, bringing that offshore flow across southern California. This is around Wednesday next week, January 21st and 22nd. So I'm not going to get into specifics. I'm certainly not issuing any sort of alert at this point, but I am going to point out here that these conditions that are supporting extreme fire behavior across southern California, that being the lack of rain, and these areas of low pressure that bring the Santa Ana wind events, the dry conditions, the dry vegetation, the dry air, and the strong offshore flow with those gusty winds, the same potential setup is there as we head into next week. So no end in sight, potentially, exacerbating these issues as we head through the middle and late part of the month of January. The other thing I notice here is we just continue to see these troughs try to make their way into Western Canada and the Pacific Northwest, but these diving and kind of, expanding troughs across the central U.S. kind of block that flow. So the pattern, as I kind of show you the precipitation, the moisture, and related to that, the precipitation, we see this big intrusion of dry air right now. As we get into mid and late week, the current high slides off to the east, so we get that return flow mid to late week. I mentioned the chance for some showers and storms kind of hugging the Gulf Coast mid to late work week, and then as we get into the weekend, look for a bigger, return flow of moisture, an area of low pressure to potentially develop here. Rain and thunderstorms in the forecast to call rain and storms in the forecast across the Gulf Coast as we get into the end of the week, into the weekend. Maybe the chance for some wintry precipitation on the north side of that. Then we see the big shot of Arctic air come in across the central U.S. And then look at the western U.S. as we kind of just look for the feed of Pacific moisture, I kind of mentioned here, but you can see it as I just animate the next 10 days. You see these feeds of moisture, they try to make their way in. We've got an area of low pressure here trying to bring that moisture in, but then the plunge of cold, dry air comes in across the west and just cuts that off. So we get the offshore flow across Southern California with the fire weather conditions, and now we're also kind of cutting off the precipitation across the Pacific Northwest in the near term as well, as the flow kind of reverses. So here comes another, attempt. This is January 24th, so we're way out there now at this point. But then these, shots of dry air really kind of prevent a meaningful arrival of moisture there. So the next 7 days, pretty dry up and down the West Coast. As I animate the European AI forecast for precipitation, this is all the way into next week at this point. It's not till, January 24th and 25th, the model starts hinting at maybe bringing some of that precipitation down into the Pacific Northwest. But as I just show you, the next, 15 days, the raw forecast for precipitation from the European AI, a big hole in precipitation across the western 2/3 of the country. Really, it's the Gulf Coast, the eastern U.S., up toward the northeast that may see impacts from a late week storm, but otherwise really dry across the U.S. here. And that includes the western U.S. where we have the fire weather conditions. That includes the Corn Belt here where we'll see shots of very cold air and at times some flurries. That also includes the Canadian Prairie where at times we've got clipper systems bringing some light snow, but it is not, widespread and it's not terribly meaningful, not what we would like. Because as I, just kind of take away the details here and broadly show you the next 15 days in 5-day increments here using the 500 millibar height pattern from the European AI forecast, same features just remain. Here's the next 5 days, days 5 to 10, and days 10 to 15. You notice ridging west, troughing east. That's going to continue to send shots of cold, dry air into the Corn Belt. It's going to at times allow for storm systems to run along the southern periphery of this from the southern U.S. into the eastern U.S. And it's also going to at times allow for cutoff systems, little areas of low pressure to run down the west coast. No precipitation, but ramping that fire weather risk up across portions of Southern California, and at the same time keeping generally dry conditions in place over the next 10 to 15 days across the Pacific Northwest as well. So your temperatures, just to wrap this up, again, we see a shot of cold air, bitterly cold air making its way across the Corn Belt early this week. Temperatures rebound a bit mid to late week across the Corn Belt before a widespread shot of polar air, Arctic air, makes its way in across the lower 48. Taking a look at, how far south those 0 degree Fahrenheit temperatures may reach, anywhere you see in that orange and red shading there is where we've got, a significant chance of temperatures below zero as we get into on the left. This is Monday, January 20th, Tuesday, January 21st on the right, all the way down to the Ohio Valley, parts of Kansas and Missouri, especially where we have snow on the ground, has that potential to get down to 0 degrees as we get to early part of next week. We'll watch this one over the next several days, but certainly some very cold air in the forecast across the Corn Belt. Not a lot of snow in the forecast across the Corn Belt. The western U.S., it's looking dry. The fire weather conditions continue to be a big concern over the next 10 to 15 days. In the south, the pattern continues here where, every 4 to 6 days, we're talking about a higher impact storm making its way in. And across the Northeast and the Great Lakes, certainly that, lake effect snow risk continues over the next 7 days. And you too will watch for the potential for some higher impact storms as we get into that 5 to 15 day time frame. We'll watch what happens, what develops across the south, and then kind of runs up the area as we get into early next week. I threw this in here just, visualizing the 10-day temperature trends across parts of the Corn Belt. I threw in Champaign, Illinois, again, a local bias here, but those highs over the next several days, pretty cold in the upper teens with the current shot of colder air. You see that rebound late week, 33 for the high Thursday, 38 on Friday, 33 on Saturday, but then that next shot of Arctic air arrives, overspreads really a lot of the central and eastern U.S., the whole Corn Belt getting down toward the Gulf Coast. Look for those temperatures, 0 degrees across a lot of the Corn Belt as we get into early next week. Those afternoon temperatures in the single digits in a lot of areas.